Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning, afternoon. We're going to be starting in a few moments. While we wait, if you do have a piece of paper and something to write with nearby, we are going to be doing a writing exercise as part of our content today. So please feel free to take this moment to grab something or get something that you need. And I'll repeat this for those who are just joining us. Hello, welcome. We're going to get started in just a few moments. While we wait, if you could please grab a piece of paper and a writing utensil. We're going to be doing a writing exercise as part of today's content, just as we're letting people filter in. If you have a paper and a pencil or pen, put it at hand for yourself. So we will be getting started. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome. Today's webinar is Growing Forward with Intention. My name is Katie Alexander. I am Zing Train's community builder, and I'm going to be your host for the hour. I am thrilled to be alongside our dynamo presenter and very interesting human, Timo Anderson, who is one of our trainers here at Zing Train. We also have, you're welcome, just saying what's true. We also have Mara Ferguson, our keynote liaison, and Alice Rolf-Chin, our digital marketing manager. They are here behind the scenes. Hey guys, they're monitoring the chat and questions with me. We are coming to you live from Ann Arbor, Michigan, but we would love to hear where you are tuning in from. If you want to, drop your location in the chat by clicking that chat icon at the bottom of your screen and let us know where you are today. And if you read about any neighbors, be sure to say hello. All right, we're going to dive into the good stuff very soon. I have a couple more pieces of housekeeping for us all. As far as the format of today's webinar, we're going to be in conversation and presenting here for a bit, and then we will leave some time at the end for Q&A. We'll be collecting questions in the Q&A section throughout, so feel free to submit questions you have by clicking on that Q&A button, also in the bottom of your Zoom screen. We're going to do our very best to get to as many of your questions as possible today, but should we not be able to answer your questions, we will be sure to get back with you with all the answers we can in the days to follow. There is also closed captioning available during today's presentation. And if you would like to turn that on, Alice is going to drop some details in the chat. And you can find the closed captioning button, like all of the other buttons, also at the bottom of your Zoom screen. The last item of business is that we are recording this conversation. And we'll be sending out the recording in the next day or so. So be sure to look out for that in your inbox soon. It will also live on zingtrain.com in our resources tab, our website, zingtrain.com. So you can find it there, as well as all sorts of free resources, including past webinars that we have done. So thank you for listening to all of that. And now let's dive into what we're here to talk about. Today, we are going to be talking about mindful self-management, some tools and tricks to be present in the moment, to better embrace, feelings and challenges. But we wanted to preface sort of why we thought that this was timely a bit. So that is why we've invited our trainer, Timo Anderson, to join us this month. A little bit of fun facts around Timo. He's just celebrated his 8-year anniversary here at Zing Train, which is huge, and we're very happy for him. And yeah, among other great qualities, he's really passionate about mindfulness and managing one's energy. He also has been a big part of Symposium, the planning committee for Symposium each year, which is an annual in-person event that we have hosted since 2019. And it's an event that we host whose theme changes every year. The broad inspiration for this event is to bring people together to gather and have a transformative learning experience. It's an opportunity for us to highlight topics that we think are really important, but that are more like new and current and actively churning within us. apart from the well-established content that we have been training on through Zingerman's for decades at this point. So it's just an opportunity for us to share new voices, new ideas with all of you from people who we think are really inspiring and that we want to shine a spotlight on. And so we bring in a lot of keynote speakers. We weave it all together with some Zingerman's philosophy and, of course, lots of great food and networking and reflection time. And so this year, we are dedicating our Symposium to growth through challenges. And we wanted to just talk about growth through challenges as something that we collectively go through. And that's sort of our subject of Symposium. And then we'll get into sort of growth through challenges within yourself, which is this mindfulness component. So Timo, I'll pass it off to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that intro. As we were trying to think about this webinar, it's a growth that we're all kind of going through. And we were excited about thinking about how are we growing and what are the things we could share to give some tools and some tips to be able to have some information. And as we get to Symposium in the summer, there was just some amazing content that we're going to get to. And part of it we couldn't fit in, which was this mindfulness content that we're going to share a little bit later. But in doing that, we wanted to share what are those pieces that we're going to have that we're super excited about, because there's so much energy that we found kind of getting through these pieces. We have a great writer named John U. Bacon, and some of you may know of him if you're in the Michigan area, who really took a challenging situation of a hockey team and used his leadership skills not to lead them so much, but to lead them towards leading themselves and taking that really challenging worst hockey team in the country and moving them forward, and really started to help do that. And this is one of the exciting things we're thinking about of how we're gathering these new tools, and wanted to share that. We have a couple others. Katie's going to share one, and then I'll come back and talk about a couple other parts of our Symposium that we're just really excited about as we move into this season.
Yeah, we also have Dr. Richard Tedeschi, who's a psychologist who defined the concept of post-traumatic growth. And he's coming to talk about how that concept, it talks about how people can respond to trauma in really transformative ways, and bringing that into how leaders can recognize and help their organizations transform other people. Timo?
Of course, we really couldn't do a Symposium without having Ari, and he really was excited about how his ecosystem model has started to shift and say, okay, when something happens, how does the ecosystem react? And Amy Emberling was great, because as she heard about this concept, it was really thinking about how to go back to that core of guiding principles and missions, and finding ways to get some flexibility to think about how she can move forward through times of uncertainty, and using those missions and guiding principles to help with those tools. Finally, if we don't have guiding principles and missions, we also have vision here at Zingerman's, and we want to think about visioning as that tool that helps get what does it look like when this thing has happened, when that challenge has been overcome. And so we're really, really excited about having some of these pieces. The last one we want to talk about, I'm going to leave for Katie, because I know she's excited about having this woman here to talk.
Yeah, so the last person that we'll just briefly highlight, we have a woman named Huda Essa coming. She's a children's book author and cultural competency consultant. She works with organizations, schools, businesses to help them realize and unlearn bias that they might have and don't see, and work together to build more inclusive workplaces, while still recognizing the individual lens that everyone is seeing the world and workplace through. That was really energizing, Timo. It's really exciting what's coming up for us in 2 short months. I hope that sort of helped frame why we are really focusing on mindfulness in our webinar. So I'm going to pass things over to you, Timo, and let you take us all on a mindful journey, ways to be present and connect with ourselves. This content, is sort of kind of like the little sister to Symposium, where Symposium is about embracing challenge and finding growth collectively. This is really about looking inward at discomfort and maybe personal challenges, and finding ways to be present and grow through them yourself.
Thanks, Katie. And I'm going to start sharing this, my content here, and getting a few slides up for you to reference and see. Wanted to start with just a base concept that we've got from Sharon Begley, who was one of the people that we put in here. Mindfulness, or mindful awareness, is the practice of observing one's inner experiences in a way that is fully aware but non-judgmental. You stand outside your own mind, observing the spontaneous thoughts and feelings that the brain throws up, observing all of this as if it were happening to someone else. And so thinking from this framework, and I will absolutely share, I am not a mindfulness expert. I am a mindfulness novice who continues to want to think about this process, but mindful self-management and thinking about how we engage and connect with others is one of those pieces of what I try to work on in order to continue to get better. We've had lots of challenges. We've had lots of things that pull our brain thoughts, that make us focus on other things than we'd like to be present at. And so really trying to start to say, okay, how do I tune in? How do I intentionally choose some things, whether it be myself, my moods, my surroundings, really thinking about all of these different things that are coming in, all this data that we're now processing and focusing on and saying, here's all these things that are coming at me, right? Social media of various sorts, all these other challenges, people coming at me in various directions, and all these different things. And how do I start to do that? And how do I start to appreciate these small interactions, right? Breathing, basking in the beauty of the world, acknowledging myself and how many great things are going on within the organizations. How do I find some of those positives? And even if we're working all the while to make everything much better than it already is, I may be at work that there's a lot of real positivity that I can find and I can put in place. I really wanted to start to get us into this mindset. And so to do that, as we said, if you have a piece of paper, we're going to do a little bit of work. We're going to spend a couple minutes doing some writing to start to think about and intentionalize. So for those of you who did your meditation this morning or some other mindfulness work, we're going to do a little bit more just to get everybody warmed up and kind of reconnected with their space. So here's what I'd like to do. I'd like you to use all 5 senses: sight, sound, smell, touch, and taste. You're going to take that piece of paper. We're going to give you about 2.5 minutes, and I'd like you to describe your space in as much detail as possible. And by detail, I don't mean that you just say I would say there's a purple wall behind me, but I'd say there's a light purple wall that has a lot of variation in color and shade because of the lighting we have on it. And I like the shadows that are coming from the shelf and looking at the 3 interesting plants that we have on the shelf behind me. So trying to get more and more detailed and nuanced. The fact that I had an amazing chocolate bar from Katie, the managing partner here, that's still lingering. I think from before we even started. And there's this deep, dark chocolate flavor. It's still present. And so it's still exciting, and I can kind of feel it even though I'm talking and sharing and in front of all of you. So I'd like you to start to do that. I'm going to, as I said, give you 2.5 minutes. I want you to write as many as possible things that you notice about your current space. Just going into your space and observing in as much detail and as much focus as you possibly can. Go ahead and get started. Think about those scents that are floating through your space. Or maybe the texture of the table or the space you're writing on. If you're on a couch, the texture and feel of that, whether by fingers, right, as you touch it, or just by visual. What is the taste? Is there breakfast? Is it a lunch? What are those pieces? Is it a midday snack? What are those things that you're noticing by taste? What are you hearing besides my voice constantly updating and checking in with you? What other sounds? There's a background of a slight electrical hum in my studio right now as the HVAC has just turned on and started to move some air. As you're writing, thinking about, can I describe it one layer deeper with a bit more detail, with something else that includes and expresses even more than what I had before, if I've started to slow down in what I've noticed. The honeycomb-esque pattern of the light that we have here, the keynote light we have in our system, to help make sure that we look professional and organized here at our Zing Training Studios. All right. As you are finishing that up, we're at 2.5 minutes. Some of you who are highly observant have noticed that the time limit at the bottom says 5 minutes total. And so I'd love to then have you now take that idea, that concept of the focus and the intentionality and the extreme detail attention, and I'd like you to turn it inward. And so I'd like you to turn that same level of focus inward and what's going on inside yourself currently. What are those things you are feeling? Is there some hunger? Are you satiated? What are those things that are going on inside your head of some positive energy that you found or some challenges that you might have for the day? And start to probe and explore and mirror, kind of reflect on those things that are going on there for a couple of moments. For most of us, there's a negative lens that we'll oftentimes use in our first pass of what's going on. But thinking about what is that positive, right? One of my favorite shirts I got to wear that I am intentionally choosing to wear today because I love how it looks in the studio and I love how it processes through, right? And looks and just makes me feel. Getting to talk to all of you is an amazing uplift of energy. Finding those things that are going on internally that are both opportunities and successes. Seeing if we can have a quantity of these things that we're writing about that are going on inside ourselves. Not just, here's the 3 best ones, but how many different things can we be aware of? How many different details can we be clear on? I'm thinking which one of these was interesting, which one of these concepts was different than I would have thought about 15 minutes ago, or as I logged into the webinar, or as I woke up this morning. But one thing has changed. And having done that, I'd like you to think about, that was about 2.5 minutes. Why would, when we put together this content, this was one of the first exercises that I thought of and we've put in place for our regular mindful self-management classes and internally, both for our staff as well as externally as part of our content. But this is one of the things we like to start with, and it throws people off in most of our trainings because we usually start in a very consistent model where we share a piece of information, then we kind of talk through it and then give a framework or a scaffolding for something. But this is really starting to say, what is that space I can make to gather, to think about and intentionally kind of process some of the information and process some of the details that are going on around me. And if I process some more, if I have some others that are processing in a somewhat intentional way or getting more information and we start sharing that information together, the decisions we start to make become even more effective. So mindfully managing myself and saying, here's how I can do some of these pieces. Here's how I can process and engage in some of these pieces of new space of, wow, I wasn't aware that this might be impacting me today. I wasn't aware of how this could be impacting me today, and thinking about how those pieces function. So one of my favorite stories in doing this is that Ari talked about working with Paul for the last 40 years. It's actually 44, 45 years that they've worked together in various businesses, but here at Zingerman's, it's been just over 40. And thinking about the fact that by having those two pieces of information, right, and gathering and pulling from two different directions, the variety and the information is not just twice as much, but almost 3 or 4 times as much information, because it synthesizes in new different ways. And so it brings more ideas and concepts. So being aware of those things and how they're impacting me, whether it's internal or that external resources, taking a moment and seeing how much data, how much information we can absorb becomes really, really important to moving yourself and your organization forward. And so liking to think about this space and creating some spaces to say, am I getting all that information I need? Am I intentionally kind of being aware of all of these senses, or am I just using that one and kind of using one space to get information from, right? Growing through it, through challenge and growing through the opportunity, what are those things we can take from and say, yes, those are negatives, or they were challenges or things that we didn't go exactly the way we wanted. But then how do I take the positive out of that and distill, right? Being aware of those, all of the parts of those things and moving all of them forward in order to be more successful on the next version. So another piece that we want to have here is this concept of honoring emotions, and thinking about these emotions are hugely impactful on our space, on our being, on our existence. One of my favorite quotes in kind of doing this and reading through these concepts is from a Indian mystic, Rumi, who says, when you are drunken near a cliff, sit down. Now, how does that relate to these emotional pieces? Well, emotions impact all of our things, and sometimes emotions are strong. Emotions can even make us doing crazy types of things. And so the thing is, emotions happen, but we don't always have to let them take charge. When there's lots of emotions happening and lots of things stirring, we could sit down, we could take a break, we could pause. Or a theoretical pause that we could take to say, here's what I need to do. I need a space, I need a moment, I need to be able to process. And so in thinking about this concept, we also think of emotions much more like the weather, right? You could say, I'm not feeling frustrated, I'm not feeling stressed, I'm not feeling whatever. But if everyone around you can tell that you are having that because of how you're emoting and how you're physically being, right? They know that that's not the truth. You can see it in your friends and family and people that you work with, right? All of those coworkers and such, you can see where people are because they exude these things. And so part of it is really being honest and honoring those emotions. One of the things I like to connect it to is the concept of weather, right? Emotions are kind of like weather. So thinking about this idea that we look to the weather, we find out what the weather forecast is going to be in the morning. Why? So that we can put on the appropriate gear. If it's going to be raining, we're going to put on a raincoat, maybe some galoshes, maybe have an umbrella. Now, it doesn't mean we're completely protected from the rain, right? We might still get wet, but we won't get as wet as if we don't have anything. So similarly, emotions are there and present. And if we start to prepare and give ourselves some, okay, this might be an emotional moment, or I might have an emotional meeting where there's something that might impact or cause my emotions to change, right? So I want to think about this process of saying, how do we connect? And how do we prepare ourselves for those potentially emotional flashpoints, right? If there's going to be a challenging meeting, what can I do to prepare myself, right? Knowing that for me, driving in traffic can be highly stressful and frustrating and cause particular emotions. And so we have a tool that we put in place. It's a tool that I have used as practice. I will tell you it's not fixed, but I'm going to use my example to go through and think about this. And I have a strong emotion specifically regarding driving. And my emotion there is rage. I get highly enraged, or I have gotten highly enraged. Let me change that some because it's gotten better. So I would get rage from other people not following my rules. Now, when I first started teaching this content a few years ago, I would say following the rules. But part of my first learning was, you know what, we all have our own set of driving rules. I know there is an organized set, right? And you can go online, you can go in your states, you can go in the driver training, and there is a organized set of distilled rules. But I don't know that I would say there's something that we've all agreed upon when it comes to the rules. And so I realized that drivers not following my rules is the cause that I have for stress, for challenge, and then for rage and getting highly frustrated. Now, what were my past behaviors? Yelling, hand gestures, right? Flicking my lights, all sorts of other things that I could do to try to share my frustration or anger or stress or rage with another driver. And then the past outcomes is I would be more aggressive potentially, right? And I had elevated stress. And in thinking about this, it wasn't something that was really positive. Now, my eldest child moved up to the front seat a few years ago. And this is where I had that light bulb moment, because all of a sudden they were sitting next to me and yelled at the car in front of me as that car cut me off. And in doing that, thinking about, wow, here's that moment of something that I've now shared as a tool or concept for my child that's now interacting with traffic in a way that isn't idealized in my world. And I said, wow, this is not, ideal. This is not what I want. This is very much kind of against my general beliefs. And so I had to take a moment and process, what could I do? What did I actually want? And how did I want to change? So of course, the next component here is, what is that future outcome? And this is like our vision, right? Something we talk about. It's a short vision. It's a small vision for what is that future outcome I want to achieve? What do I want to gather? What do I want to have and hold on to as a tangible thing that I'd like to have as a different outcome to when other people aren't following my rules? And I wanted to try to be calm, to not be reactive, to in some way figure out how to mitigate that moment, to be able to say, what is my reaction to this stressor? Think about how this concept was in between the action and response. There's a moment for me to react. And in that moment, I wanted to figure out how to be calm. And so I had to think about, what is that potential need for that driver? What is that potential situation that that driver who's next to me might be in, that might be overwhelming for them? Think about the concept of what happens if they are late for work again? What happens if maybe someone at home is having a medical challenge and they're stressing and rushing to get home to be able to help take care of them? If I assume positive intent and put a positive space, and in my mind, if I can slide that thought in between my initial, like, oh my God, they're cutting me off, and then move into, wow, they may need something else. And if I can slide that positive intention thought into my brain, I have a much different response, because now I'm responding in a very intentional way. We were doing this training and someone said, hey, you know what? I know how to make sure that no one ever cuts you off again. And I was like, oh, this is sweet. They're going to tell me some sort of technique. Maybe they were like a former police driver or someone who had some driving training. So what is that technique of how to like position the car, make it so it's really hard? And they said, no, the actual answer is that you just let them in and no one will ever cut you off again. And it was like, oh yeah, but that's so like nice. And then I realized, yeah, that's so nice, right? That is so terribly nice and conceptually works really, really well with me thinking about what might be the reason they're cutting me up. What might be that component? And so this table, thinking about what is that emotion and the trigger that causes it, and thinking about what's happened in the past and what the outcomes were, and assessing that and saying, is this where I want to be? Is this how I want to exist? Is this how I want to react to these situations moving forward? If it is, great. If it isn't, what is that opportunity I can take, and what is that outcome I'd rather have happen? What is that other choice that I could make? And then what is the thought process? What is the intentional effort I need to take in order to move through that? Growing myself forward and thinking, what is that next opportunity for me to have a better space and a better opportunity to move through that? Now, this is a great tool. One of my other favorite tools is really thinking about inner dialogue. And I like to think about this one. This inner dialogue and self-respect is a lot of us are great leaders, are great people to our coworkers. And we're a food business. So the example I tend to work with here is, if you have that coworker who accidentally drops a tray full of dishes, right? Empty, dirty dishes, and they drop them, they smash all over the place. Most of us, they're doing this training a number of times, would say something like, wow, you know what? Totally understand. I've done it hundreds of times. It's all good. Here, let me help. We've all done this. It's totally okay. Let's talk about it later. Let's just get this taken care of. It's no big worry. And these are all the things we externalize to another coworker or someone who might be newer and makes this mistake. The challenge is that inner dialogue. What happens if we made that same mistake? If we, as an experienced server, were to drop a tray and know how much those things cost and know what that takes to now clean up and know the challenge it was for all the guests who were in the restaurant because we've startled them and shocked them. And so the energy has changed a little bit, right? We say all those things and then we say all sorts of really mean things internally to ourselves. And you can translate this to any job of, you get that email of, hey, I was supposed to get something from you yesterday. And internally you're like, oh, totally didn't do that. Why the heck? That was crazy. You're a terrible person because you didn't get it to them, right? And you start saying these things inside your head. Inside our head is a really potent place because work is a manifestation of self. This is a strong belief that work really does manifest itself in the person and it comes out, even if you don't think it is. And so if you have these thoughts internally, they're going to come out in some way by phrase, by energy, by facial expression. They're going to be present and they're going to manifest themselves in other ways. And it's just a rhetorical question for you to think about. Imagine your internal voice is your boss and your external voice, your external conscious person awareness. How many times would you have quit if your boss, an external boss, talked to you like your internal voice? How many of you said, that's not appropriate, that's not acceptable? And our inner voice is the only one that's going to be there forever. So intentionalizing and thinking about that is one of those key elements. Thinking about what you're saying and try and say, wow, you know what? I did make a mistake. That's totally okay. I'll own it, but I don't have to think about that as a mistake that overwhelms everything that I'm doing. The other one is rumination. I don't know about you, but rumination, it comes from the concept of cows chewing their cud and ruminating it through the stomach system in order to be able to process it. It's not a very pleasant thought, but as you're thinking that same thought over and over, those circular thoughts and having that same thing going through your brain, one of the things I remembered was elementary school. And I don't know if all of you are old enough to have had to do this, but in elementary school, I was given sentences. I think it was for talking too much in class, which is why I'm now in this job, but it might've been talking and interrupting others. And so it said something like, I will not interrupt in class, or I will not talk while the teacher is talking. And you have to write a certain number of sentences on that page. And so the first 2 or 3 you can do with very little intention, right? And you start writing them, but then your brain gets bored. And you start doing things like drawing a line and pretending that's an I in all the lines. So you don't have to write all the little individual I's, you just write the whole bunch of them in a single line. Your brain doesn't like to do repetitive things. So if you write it down and you start to process it and put it out and externalize that thought that's spinning, putting it down on a piece of paper and trying to write it every time you think about it will start to turn your brain into wow, that's not a really effective use of time. Let's turn our brain and turn our efforts towards something else. It's just a wonderful trick that our brain has done to not overwhelm and not overprocess. So we ruminate internally, but it's seldomly that we ruminate externally if we share that information in writing. Now, another part of this is this concept that I would like to share of words and how they impact us and the power that these words have in order to impact what we are doing. So should is one of these words. I would love to ban should, but I can't. It's a word that is present. But I'd like you to think about it in a couple different ways. My first phrase is stop shooting on yourself. You might have heard a variation of this at some point, but the definition that I have now come up with for should is a could with shame. And that shame is coming in some direction from someone else, from somewhere else, from some other space. So turning that should into a could. When you're sitting on the couch, watching some sort of show and relaxing, and all of a sudden your brain says, oh, you should be doing laundry, or oh, you should be going for a walk, or you should be doing these other things. Most of our enjoyment, most of us, the enjoyment of that show all of a sudden goes away. Because that concept of should, the shame of that, I should be doing something else, makes it so I'm not enjoying what I was doing. So just changing the verbiage in our brain, saying, yes, I could be doing laundry, but I've chosen to do this for the next hour because it gives me some relaxation. It gives me some brain space, and being able to say, here's the things that are exciting and inspiring because I want to be able to do this. I want some space because I had a longer day, or I have a bunch of things I need to do, and I've got 1 hour allocated for this. Turning that should into a could, that positive space, right? And having that could opportunity is an internal choice. I could be doing that, but I'm choosing to do this. I could be doing something else, but I'm in control of what I'm doing here. A should is often that voice on our shoulder, whether it be parental, boss, coworker, but there's some sort of other voice that has some sort of authority in that moment from our past, from our beliefs, right? That is coming in and saying, there's some negative component of what you're doing right now, so you should be doing something else. And internalizing this shift from should into could is a way of managing my ability to think about what I am doing. And I could be doing those things, and I'm choosing to do this other thing instead. Additionally, the concept of have to, or you have this thing that you need to do, right? I would challenge that there is absolutely nothing that you have to do. And if we were in a live interactive, I might even ask you, what are the things you believe you have to do? Right? And some people say, I have to go to work, or I have to go to a meeting, or I have to pick up my kids, or I have to take my kids to this thing. And I think of here that have to is that driver of I'm really busy, right? I'm so busy, I have to go pick up these things. I have to drop off laundry. I have to do all of these different pieces. If I were to tell you that you didn't have to do anything, it kind of said, most people kind of look at me like, I don't think you're telling the truth. And I don't think that's a fair statement. Now, I will put in a caveat. You don't have to do anything. There are consequences sometimes if we don't do it. But saying have to versus choosing to changes the dynamic of that internal conversation, and verbalizing externally changes some of the energy and effort towards it. I had this realization when I was talking a number of years ago for both of my children, and I had 5 different dance classes and 3 different gymnastics classes. And someone would say, oh, what are you doing after work? And say, oh, I have to take, this child here, and I have to take another child here, and then I have to pick them up, and I have to drive them home and make dinner, and it's going to be late. And I realized I didn't have to do any of those things. When I heard this the first time, I didn't have to take them to class. I was choosing to. And the thing is, it wasn't even have to in that moment taking them to class. I didn't have to sign them up. Now, flipping this around, I got to the point of thinking about, I'm choosing this because it was an opportunity for them to experience some kinesthetic learning, some kinesthetic awareness of themselves, a way for them to engage with other people and socialize, for them to think about and start to talk about some of those other pieces and move, right? Become more aware of themselves in their space. But I was choosing this opportunity. And so I could no longer say, oh, I have to do this, and it's crazy, that's so demanding. I'm so busy with all this after school stuff for my children. So I can change that language. I can change the verbiage. I can change the whole concept, the paradigm, right? Of I'm now choosing to be able to do these things. I'm choosing to have these opportunities for my children. And so in choosing to do this, I can turn a positive spin on it and say, I'm choosing to do this so they have a great experience. And in doing so, I'm making it an opportunity. And so driving them and picking them up and doing those things is no longer a chore. It's now an opportunity to help them have these experiences. One of my favorite stories from this is teaching it internally. And there's a gentleman who's at our deli who came to the internal mindful self-management class. And he taught him this content, and he said, was thankful and et cetera. And he shared this concept as one of his favorites from the internal class. And I saw him a few months later, and he stopped me at the deli and he said, hey, Timo, I just wanted to tell you, every single morning when I walk in, I ask myself before I walk in the deli, do I have to be here today or am I choosing to be here? And every single day I've chosen to be here. And my engagement is different than it ever was because I'm choosing to be present. So I would challenge you to think about, do I have to be at this meeting? Do I have to make this phone call? Or am I choosing to be in that meeting or be on that phone call or attend that Zoom training, right? Oh, I have to go to this thing because my boss made me. Okay. Or are you choosing to be present and think about what your engagement is, what your connection is to that content and how you are then moving that forward, how you're processing that and how you are engaging in that meeting. Are you fully present or are you just checking email in the back behind the Zoom meeting, right? These are all things that we control. And it's how I have grown myself forward to say, I'm choosing these things that I'm engaged in. I'm choosing to be at meetings. And so stopping and being intentional and saying, where am I at right now? If I don't feel like I'm ready to be there, is there a soda? Is there caffeine? What are those things that I could do in order to be more ready and more contented, more connected? One of the things that it was really interesting because I am not an introvert. Some of you may notice that from me being present here and engaged. I'm not one of those introvert individuals who has a lot of concerns about going out. And so for me, gatherings are great. But in hearing the concept from some introverts just saying going to a party is like this thing like, oh, I have to be there for so long. I have to be present. I have to like talk and it's so exhausting and it's so crazy, right? Because I don't want to hurt someone's feelings. And so we put this third option or this third phrase here of can't. Because sometimes there's people, there's friends, if you're invited to a birthday party and you have had the longest week, right? And you may really trust and believe in them and you may have a great relationship with this friend, but it's a gathering they've been really excited to have you at. There's a bunch of other people, but they wanted you to be present and you just know that if you go, it's not going to be fun. You would feel like you had to be there. The energy would be a drain, but you don't want to tell them because it doesn't feel comfortable saying, I'm choosing not to go. I'm very intentionally thinking about my energy, my space, and saying, this is not something I can commit to and be fully present. And so this is where we use the word can't. I can't make it because, and so to be perfectly honest, it's a small white lie of information, right? It's a small share of, I'm a way to get out of this concept without causing as much pain, right? They're still going to be upset that you can't make it, but it's not saying I'm choosing not to be there. Now, in an ideal world, we'd be all comfortable to say, I'm choosing not to be present. I'm choosing not to be there because I'm wanting to get recharged. I'm wanting to relax. I'm wanting to kind of have some intentional individual space. But can't is a softer way of having these pieces present. These words, these concepts help me and have helped me continue to move forward, right? Thinking about emotions and intentionally processing what is the emotion that's going on and how can I change that? How can I change my reaction to any of these pieces? And then starting to work on what are the words and how do these words have power? Power over others and power over me in order to slowly and intentionally change the language that I'm using with people all around me and people in my space. And most importantly, my own self and how I'm presenting and the energy that I have to move forward. So that's what I would like to share with you today. And I know we have some time allocated for some questions, some other concepts, and any other conversation that Katie would like to share that I got. I wasn't looking at chat or any other pieces. So if there's questions or such based on the information we've shared, just really fun content. It's heavy, big content, but things that are really fun for me to get to share with all of you.
Thank you so much, Timo. Yeah, I'll jump back in here. Hello. We do have a couple of questions. I just wanted to share a little personal reflection myself about the last piece you talked about, the power of language and how you phrase shoulds and coulds. And for me, actually, when we were just starting up the webinar this morning, I said out loud, "Oh, yeah, I have to do that." And immediately said, "Wait, I get to do that." Like I find myself changing my haves to gets. And for me, that is almost like a, it's almost like gratitude. And it totally changes my perspective. And it's something that I learned from you, Timo, very early when I started working at Zing Train. And I have been practicing it enough that I really hear myself correcting myself every time a have and a should comes out of my mouth. So everything is a practice, and it does slowly make a difference in how you show up for moments and engage. And I think also being able to be vulnerable about it and admit immediately when when you slip up in that way, is yeah, it's lovely. Okay, so I now have a slew of questions for you, Timo, that we've gotten from our participants. The first one is from Denise, and she's asking, do you recommend creating a daily journal to help keep yourself on track with feelings of should versus could, have to versus choose, can't? Talk a little bit about journaling in this realm of mindfulness.
Sure. I am not a journaling person. I have tried the concept. Ari is a huge fan and a proponent. He writes every single morning. He can talk to you for days about his journals that he writes in as a way of kind of having a drop space. I am much more of the kind of in the moment, doing some what we call hot pen or kind of free writing, and when I have a number of things going on in my head as a way to clear it. But I think it's a wonderful tool for people who can build in that practice. Because I think it is the practice of saying, okay, what am I doing and what is my choice today? So Katie talked about hearing have to and trying to process that. So if it's an end of day journal of saying, hey, a number of times today, I heard myself say have to, and I immediately corrected, and that felt really good. Or kind of proposing, if you're doing a journal and starting in the morning saying, today my goal is to try to hear have to and change it to an opportunistic word as opposed to a requirement word. And so I think it's an amazing tool. I think it's an amazing practice, and it really does externalize. So we don't start to try to spin in our head over and over again, as I talked about in the rumination. So that external practice, for some people who find that is an amazing tool. So I would recommend it. If it feels good, try that. For me, the kind of free writing is a tool that I use more randomly as opposed to a prescribed one. But a lot of prescriptions sometimes get you in that habit and might change that have to, and verbalizations and words and choices and emotions can start to document and put those on paper is a great way to kind of help move through some of those. And you might go more quickly than me because you have a regularized practice.
I will say, if I may jump in, I am someone who regularly journals most mornings. I've been doing it for a little over a year, and it's just free writing. But for me, if you do consistently journal and you find yourself saying the same things over and over and over again that you're not very happy about, it kind of forces you to change. So if you are journaling about feelings of should and feelings of have to and that frustration, if you tell yourself or find yourself writing through that enough, eventually you're going to get really fed up with it. and so I see that as a way that tool can be really helpful in this too.
I guess, Katie, if I would add to that, I think the other thing is if you write it, right, and you write should or write have to, like rereading that journal entry that day and saying, okay, how could I rephrase that? What is, like, writing out the reverse of that? So I'm choosing to do this thing, or whatever, that those have to or shoulds that are in your writing, actually trying to rewrite it in another way as a practice, as a way of saying, I'm going to take these and turn them into choices. I'm choosing to be present at this meeting so I can figure out what the best way to re-engage is, as opposed to saying I have to be with these people that I'm not connected to, right? How do I reframe that and re-put it into something that I can have as an opportunity as opposed to a requirement?
Absolutely. All right, another question for you. I need to manage myself before a meeting this afternoon. Any suggestions for a quick win in mindfulness going into that?
Absolutely. Another tool I didn't get to talk about is doing if trying to get your energy to move up. So thinking about some appreciations. So I could say, Katie, I appreciate we had a great script, we had great meetings and great prep, right? Really specific, intentional appreciations. Ari has labeled this, or labeled a tool called 3 and Out. If you do 3 appreciations, your energy will naturally rise. The other way that I would think about is, what does it look like when that meeting goes really well? So even a mini vision, right? What does it look like when I have a really good end of this meeting? Even if it's a meeting I don't love, what is the best opportunity I would prefer to have at the end of that meeting? Writing 2 or 3 sentences about what that looks like and saying, here's what it looks like, and seeing if you can get there. Right? I doodled 3 pages worth of information. I doodled 3 pages in my workbook, and 3 of the pieces are really cool. I thought they were gorgeous, right? It can be really minimal, but thinking about, I have this meeting, I don't have the energy for at this moment. What are those positives? If I don't have positives I can latch onto in that meeting, getting my energy up as much as possible, giving specific intentional specific intentional appreciations to people, either by text, by phone, or in person beforehand, your energy will rise. And if it falls during the meeting, going back out and doing the same thing, appreciating other people, and your energy will start to move back up. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think that's a great tip. There really are so many different practices in this space of mindful self-management. Timo, can you give some examples of the best ways that you like to practice mindfulness in work throughout the day?
Yeah. So, I mean, part of it, I think, is reading where my where I'm feeling, right? So before this, right, I made sure, and I will share, I mean, I made sure I had caffeine and water, right? So one of my practices, and Katie knows this very well, I am a big fan of Diet Coke, right? So I could just drink Diet Coke and I would feel fine mentally, but physically that isn't very healthy. And so intentionally kind of making sure I'm hydrating, right? Thinking about the process of, did I have the food I need when I need it? Right. And so being aware of, what am I eating? I had some health things happen over the past year. And so being even more intentional about making sure I have the food that is feeding myself in a very intentional way and feeding what I need, right? As opposed to some of the sugar that I used to thoroughly enjoy. While sugar is a treat, and a candy bar, beautiful chocolate is wonderful to have as something, making sure there's a balance there of having some of those other things that help give me the energy to be in front of you and fully connected and engaged and excited. That's one of those pieces that I think about personally that I've done over the past couple of years. Besides that, really is that have to, right? And I don't know, Katie, you've known me for a number of years now. I don't know that you've heard me use have to in a very long time. So like scrubbing that from my language and not having that, and just intentionally. I mean, the other thing I think of in regard to that I'm much even more intentional about is taking busy out of my language. Right. And so instead of saying I'm busy, I have a number of trainings today. Wow, I could say, oh my God, I'm so busy. I have 3 trainings. I have all this stuff to do. Right. There's a kind of energy around that, as opposed to me saying, I have the opportunity to engage with hundreds of people today and share really interesting content and make a couple of groups better. It's a much different space. I have an internal training, a client training, and all of you today. It's a much different mental space to come at when I'm not saying I'm busy with this, but it's an opportunity and I'm excited about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure I have heard have to come out of your mouth. It's great. I mean, you're embodying it and being a leader for everyone in that way. Okay, last question we have is, given all this talk about mindfulness, does Zingerman's prioritize mindfulness in the organization? And if so, like, how do you see that come through?
I think we're working in that direction. I think the concept of we're in the process of rolling out a new system of beliefs, right? We're trying to make more people aware of that. And in doing that, we have it as an internal training. It's a class, but it's an optional class. It's not a required class to do this mindfulness and management. Oftentimes it's for individuals who are becoming supervisors or managers. They'll have it as a requirement. We haven't moved it to the requirement level. So I think it's still in the kind of inspirational, as Ari likes to talk about in the ecosystem, it's still a seed that is being planted. It has not grown and become the flower or the tree within the organization like vision or service or other concepts that have been fully kind of sprouted and grown into full. It's still new within this space. We don't have all of it figured out. Perfectly honestly, we have some concepts and some tips. We shared a couple of them. We don't have them all figured out, but I think it's been planted, and the opportunity in the cultural soil, as Ari likes to talk about, is strong because we have a great organization. And so I think it can continue to grow as more and more people partake and think about it and help change how we're doing it within the organization.
Yeah, I will say too. So I recently retook the Welcome to Zingerman's Community of Business class, which is an orientation class that all new employees across our businesses take. And Ari teaches that class still, which is a whole nother subject, which is really cool. But in that class, he does spend a little bit of time talking about managing your own energy. And so there are pieces of mindfulness, mindful self-management that I do see sort of weaved into our content. I mean, that's arguably the first class that any Zingerman staff should take. It doesn't, gets to take.
Wonderful catch, Katie.
Thank you. It was very timely. Now I've lost my train of thought. But it of course is something that we mindfulness is something that we are always trying to be more mindful of and plugging it into more places in our culture. But it's there, and if we're all practicing it, then we're all helping each other grow in it together too. Timo, thank you so much for spending this hour with us, and thank you everyone for joining us today, spending some time together, asking some great questions. If anything has gone unanswered, if anything has creeped in, we will do our very best to get an answer to you shortly. I want to, again, extend a huge thank you to you, Timo, for sharing a mindful hour with us. And Tamara and Alice, thank you so much for rocking out the chat and other things unseen that you're doing behind the scenes. We're going to drop a link into the chat if you do want to learn more about Symposium and continue your journey of growing forward in new ways this year. We'd also love to hear what you thought of today's conversation, and what you might like to see in future webinars, future topics, things that are of interest to you. We're dropping a brief link in the survey. We absolutely love to hear from you. If you could take a few moments to give us some feedback, we would really, really appreciate it. And finally, as a reminder, you will be receiving this webinar as a recording in your inbox with a couple of other resources. So be sure to keep your eyes peeled. So happy day to you all. Thank you again for joining us. Take great care and have a great rest of your day.